Hello everyone and welcome to Tech with NK. In this video, I'm going to propose a solution to the exercise guessing game from CS50's Introduction to Programming with Python. I'm going to show you how I went about solving this exercise. However, my aim is just to provide a few tips or hints for you to build upon while attempting this exercise yourself later on. That said, let's look at the exercise and see what's required of us. So in this exercise, we are required to create a Python file, we call it game.py, and implement a program that will prompt the user for a level, and if the user does not input a positive integer, the program should prompt the user again. And if the user does input a positive integer, we are supposed to randomly generate an integer between 1 and n, that's the user's input, using the random module. Then, our code is supposed to prompt the user to guess an integer. And if the guess is not a positive integer, the program should prompt the user again. However, if the guess is smaller than the integer, the program should output too small and prompt the user again. If it is larger, it should output too large, prompting the user again. And if the guess is just right, the program should output just right and exit. So from the hints, we've been told to use a random module and to check out the Python documentation on this module to see the various functions or methods that are available to us. And we've been given a demo. In this case, if the user enters level 1, then the guess should just be 1 and the answer should be just right, or our reply should be just right. And if the user enters something like level 10 and guesses 5, it should go on to say too large, and the user guesses 3, it should go on to say just right because the user got it right this time around. At this point, I think the exercise is clear enough, and I'm just going to open up VS Code to show you how to do this. I've gone ahead already to create the directory game and the file game.py. I believe you can do that already on your own. And from this point, we're just going to write the code to solve this exercise. To do this efficiently, I'm going to break the exercise into 2 blocks of code. The first block of code would be to get the level from the user, and the second block of code will be to let the user guess until he gets the right answer. So we'll start by importing the module random. I'll say import random. Then I'm going to start my while loop, or just say while true. I'm going to try to get input from the user because this line of code could actually fail. I'm going to create a variable or call it level. I'm using the int function here to convert the user's input into an integer, and I'm using the input function to get input from the user. I'm going to pass a string to it. I'll just say level, and I'll give space for the user to enter his input. And so this line of code is going to check if the user's input is actually an integer, and if not, it's going to return an error, which we're going to catch later on using our except block. And if the user successfully enters an integer at this point, what we're going to do is, I'll create a second variable or call it value, and I'm going to use the random module, and in this module, I'm going to use the function runIn to generate a random integer using the input from the user from 1 to a level. And this line of code is just going to generate a random integer using the input from the user with 1 and the user's input inclusive. And if we succeed to create a random value, what I want to do at this point is to break out of this loop. However, if any of these 2 lines fail, that's this first line, line 6, let's say if the user enters something that is not an integer, say he enters cat or dog, this line is going to fail with a value error. Or line 7, if the user enters an integer that is not a positive integer, say the user enters something like -1, -2, -5, or any negative value, this line of code, line 7 too, is going to fail with a value error. So I'm going to use an except block to catch any of these errors. All I'm going to say is except value error. What do I want to do? I'll just continue, meaning I want to go back to the top of my loop to prompt the user again for a level. And this block of code is good enough to get the level from the user, checking any mistakes that could occur. And now that we have the level from the user, what we need to do is to prompt the user to guess what our random value is. I'm still going to use another while loop to do this. All I'll say is while true, try to get input from the user. I'm going to save this input in a variable or call it guess, or convert it to an integer as well, and I'll use the input function to get the value from the user, or pass a string to it, or say guess, and I'll give space for the user to enter his input. And if the user enters something that is not an integer, we're going to use an except block saying except value error. Say the user entered something like cat, dog, or anything in that like. Continue. So if the user enters anything that's wrong, all we want to do is to go back to the top of our loop, prompting him once more to enter another guess. But if the user successfully enters an integer, and so we don't have any problem at the level of the try block, we're going to continue our code with an else block. That's if the try block didn't fail, and we're going to check if the user's input is less than 0, that's if it's negative, if it's less than the value, that's a random value that we generated, if it's greater than that value, or if it's just the right value. I'm going to use a bunch of if-else statements to do this. I'll start by saying if guess is less than 0, what do I want to do? I'm going to continue so that our code is just going to prompt the user once more to keep guessing. If the user keeps entering something negative, we'll just go back to the top of our loop and ask the user to guess once more. So if guess less than 0, continue. If guess is less than value, print too small. If guess is greater than value, what are we going to print? Yep, you got it right, too large. Else print just right and break out of the loop. Okay, so with this, we are going to successfully get input from the user and prompt the user to keep guessing till they get the right answer. I'm going to go ahead and save this, or open up my terminal, and we're going to test this code together. I'm going to run python of game.py. We've been prompted to enter a level, which is what we expected. I'm going to start by entering something wrong to see how our code behaves. So I'll say -1, and we've been asked to enter a level again because -1 is not a positive integer. Let's say we entered something like cat. We've been asked to enter a level again because cat is not an integer. This time around, let's do things right and enter 5. And our code has asked us to guess, which is what we expected. Let's try something in the middle and say 3. And oh, we got it right from our first trial. That was so easy. So let's try this again and see what our code is going to do. So level, let's say 6. Our guess, let's go with 3 again and see what happens. Oh, 3 is too small, meaning that our guess should be something between 4 and 6. So let's say 4, too small, 5, too small. Obviously, it's gonna be 6, just right. And as we can see, our code works just fine. However, before we separate, let me do a quick rundown of the code to make sure everything is clear for everyone. I'll go ahead and close my terminal. And so when we look at the code, the first thing we did was to import the module random because that was expected from us in the exercise. Then we went ahead to separate the tasks into 2 blocks of code. The first one to get the level from the user, and the second one to permit the user to keep guessing till they get it right. In the first while loop, we're using the try block so that we can catch any errors made by the user. We're getting input from the user and converting it to an integer, and in case the user enters something that is not an integer, say he enters a cat or a dog, we're going to catch it with this value error here and continue the code, prompting the user once more to enter a level. Next, we're generating a random integer using the input from the user. And at this point, if the user entered a negative integer, this is going to return a value error, and we're going to catch it with this line of code, continue, prompting the user for another integer. And so this block of code will make sure that the level the user enters is always correct. And when we are sure that the level is valid, next we're prompting the user for a guess, still getting input from the user and converting it into an integer. And at this point, if the user enters something that's not an integer, say a cat or a dog, we're going to catch it with a value error and continue, prompting the user once more to enter a value. That's going back to the top of this loop. I separated my code here in a try, except, and else block. The way this works is quite simple. What we put in the try block is code that we think could fail. Like in this case, if the user enters something that's not an integer, cat or dog, the except block is going to catch any errors that could arise in the try block, like in this example, a value error. And in this case, if the except block catches that error, we're only continuing to go back to the top of the loop and prompt the user once more to keep guessing. And the else block is going to run if and only if there's no error from the try block. And in this else block, what are we doing? We're checking if the guess is less than 0. That's if the user entered a negative integer. If that's the case, we're continuing going back to the top of the loop and prompting the user once more to keep guessing. And if the user's guess is less than the value generated by the random module, print too small. If it's greater than, we print too large. And if it is not less than or greater than the value, it is obviously going to be equal to that value, and so we'll print just right and break out of the loop, and that's it for the game. So that's it for this exercise. I believe the code is easy and clear enough for anyone to understand. However, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll be more than pleased to answer them for you. If you enjoyed this video, do well to hit the like and subscribe buttons so as to promote this channel, and I look forward to seeing you in my upcoming videos. That said, have a good day.